Welcome to another edition of Tasker 101 Tutorials. This is lesson number 31. It's about time. And it's called that because we are going to be talking specifically about time inside Tasker. The way time works, different ways you can use time, and just a few tips regarding time. So first off, we're going to start with profiles. So let's go over here to profiles. And let's say we wanted to add a new profile. I'm going to call it 101 time. And we're going to use time as our context. So we're going to press time, of course, and you get the time screen. So I just want to explain a few things. Some of the things I'm going to be talking about today I have touched on in previous lessons, different ones at different times here and there through different lessons, but this is going to be one complete sort of lesson solely focused on time. So in terms of creating a profile where you're using time as a trigger, you have a couple of options. You see right now you have from and to both checked, and you have a specific time, 12:54, 12:54 in both of them. When you do that, when you have both checked and you have both the same time, then time operates as an event, meaning that this will trigger at 12:54, and that's it. It'll just trigger that one time at 12:54, and that's it. So if you have something you want to trigger at a specific time every day, then that's what you would do. Let's say, for example, when you go to bed at night, you want to trigger settings that every night at 11:30 p.m. your volume levels lower, your screen dims, etc., etc. Then you would just set this up for that, which, remember, we're talking military time. So it would be 23:30 would be 11:30, and then 23:30. Just in case you're watching this and you don't know what military time is, which I imagine most people should, but I should never assume that. Maybe you don't. Military time means instead of 12 hours a.m., 12 hours p.m., you have 24 hours. 0 is midnight, and then it goes forward from there. So 23 would be 11 and then 30. So we have this set for 23:30, 23:30. If that's all we do, then it will, every night at 11:30, this will trigger. And you could set up a different profile to switch it in the morning to trigger every morning at 8 a.m. if you wanted to. So that's how you set up something for a one-time trigger event, or one time each day trigger event, I should say. Now you might say, well, what about that repeat? Is that to make it repeat daily? No, that is not to make it repeat daily. By default, if all you do is set up a time context, then it will happen every day at that time or between those times. So let's look at between those times. So maybe you have something you want to happen, let's say between 7:30, well, that's the second time. So we'll say between 7:30 a.m. and 8:30 a.m. Now what happens when you have something happen from 7:30 a.m. to 8:30 a.m.? Let's say, for example, every day at 7:30 a.m. you want to turn off your Wi-Fi, because you know that you usually leave home for work right around 7:30 and you arrive at work at 8:30. You live in LA and it's a really long commute. So if you have this set at from 7:30 to 8:30, and then you choose a task of turning Wi-Fi off, then what's going to happen is at 7:30 it's going to turn the Wi-Fi off. And then when you get to 8:30, it's going to turn the Wi-Fi back on. Now the reason it does that, and that can be changed, and I'll show you that in a minute, in profiles you can have it set so that any settings that are changed by that profile get changed back when the profile is no longer active. So that's what that does. However, if you set this at 7:30 to turn your Wi-Fi off, but maybe you didn't go to work that day, and at 7:40 you see, oh, my Wi-Fi is off, I want to turn it back on, and you turn it on, it will stay on. And then when 8:30 gets there, nothing will happen. Because what's happening is it's triggering at 7:30, and then it sees 8:30 as the time to stop when it will revert back. So that's how the from and the to works. If you uncheck from, you don't enter a from time, then it defaults to midnight, and it tells you right there. If you have a from time but you don't have a to time, then it defaults to midnight. So that could be, for example, if you wanted to say all day. If you take them both off, it's just midnight to midnight. So basically, it's always happening, which would be pointless, but that is something you could do. Now, if you have something that's happening, let's say from 8 in the morning until 12, I'll say 12 noon, but let's say you want it to trigger repeatedly, then you check the repeat button. And you can have this happen every hour or every minute. So you can have it, you can choose minutes, and you can have this trigger every 5 minutes. Now if you do that, then what that means is starting at 8 o'clock, every 5 minutes it's going to trigger the task you've associated with this profile. Every 5 minutes until 12 p.m. and then it will stop triggering that task. And like I said, you can have any minutes or you can go with hours. So you could go 1 hours. So with 1 hours now, between the hours of 8 and noon, it's going to trigger every hour. So going back to the old example, let's say you have it at 8 a.m. turn off your Wi-Fi. And maybe you suspect you're going to turn it back on for some reason to use maybe during that hour and forget to turn it back off. So you have it set that every hour it triggers again. So this profile triggers from 8 a.m. until noon every hour. Once it hits noon, it will no longer trigger. So that's how time context works. Now you do have the option, if you see these little squiggly shuffle lines over here, if you tap that, it changes to a variable. So you can use a variable that either has a time stored in it by default, or that you set, you have a variable and you set the time. So you can do that, and we'll talk a little bit more about time variables in a minute when I get to task, but just know that you can use a variable. There are few reasons why you would use that. I don't think that's something you would use too often as a profile trigger, but you could if you wanted to. So those are the time context. Now one other thing I do want to show you, I'm just going to leave this as it is just for now, so when we go back it has it. We have to select a new task, so I'm going to select a new task. I'm going to call it 101 time info, and right now we'll just throw a beep in there just so it's there. Because what I want to show you is this is one context, but remember you can always add multiple contexts, and really that's where time I think comes in handy, or when it would be most useful. Let's open this up. Let's take off that repeat every hour, and let's just say from 8 to 12. Because it's from 8 to 12, now it isn't necessarily so much of a trigger as we're gonna use it as a context, because we're gonna long press and we're gonna click add, and now we can add an event or an application so that a certain thing will happen when something else happens and it's in between that time. So we could say event, we could say phone, and we could say phone ringing, and we'll just leave this as it is. I just want to show you. So right now we have it for 8 a.m. to noon. So let's say that every morning you get up and you're lucky, you don't have a job, but you do yoga for 4 hours every morning from 8 till noon. So you don't want to take calls from 8 to noon. So you could have this context from 8 to noon as the time, and then if the phone rings. So the phone would have to ring between 8 and noon, and that would trigger this task. And you could have a task that when this happens, you send the call to voicemail, and you immediately send a text to the number that just called you saying, I'm doing my yoga, call me back later. And we're not going to look too closely at setting that up. That's just an example. To let you know that one of the biggest reasons you might want to use time in a profile is in conjunction with another context, so that it only happens when that event happens between those times. And you can also, another thing that you can do is you can add day along with time, even though this isn't a tutorial on dates. This is about time, but just so you can see, you could Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So now you have a context where if your phone rings from between 8 and noon on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, then this thing happens. Or if you take out the phone ringing context, and let's change this to be a particular time. So now, as opposed to being a context, it's more of an event, because it just is something that triggers at 8 a.m. But instead of having it happen every day, you only want it to happen during the week. So this 8 a.m. paired with a calendar context of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday means on those 5 days only at 8 a.m. this will trigger, and only on those 5 days at 8 a.m. So in terms of time as a context for setting up a profile, that's how you would use time. So now I want to kind of talk to you a little bit about time variables. There are several time variables, and let's go into an activity. We're going to, let's see, let's use display. This is just going to kind of be a, no, I don't want to use display, I want to use something different. Let's use input. And let's use audio. There we go. That's what I wanted to use. So we're going to say that we want to put our phone into a different mode when we tap a button on our home screen, depending on what time it is. So we're going to start off with silent mode. So we're going to say silent mode on. And we're going to say if, and here's where time comes into play. Now I do want to show you the different time variables that there are in Tasker. There are several. The first one is call time in or call time out. So this is when the time that a phone call comes in or the time that a phone call goes out. Then there is email time, which is e-time, which I didn't mean to necessarily tap that. Email time. Another one is down below. Text time, which is the time that you received a text. And then there are the three basic time variables. Time, which is the current time. Time milliseconds, which is the current time in milliseconds, which, if you're interested, is counted from, I believe, January of 1970. And then time in seconds, which again is counted from January of 1970. So that gives you just a standard figure. Now, time as a variable in Tasker is written the same way, sort of, you would write time if you're writing it normally, except you use a dot instead of a colon. So if I say 10:15, that is equal to 10:15 a.m. Remember, it's military time. If I wanted to do 10:15 p.m., then I would do 22.15, and that would be 10:15 p.m. Now remember that dot. The dot, don't think of it as a decimal point, because that will confuse you. It's not a decimal point. In this context, it is just a separator. It's separating the hours from the minutes. So if you wanted to do 10:05 p.m., you just do a 5. Because that's how many hours? 22 hours, which is 10 p.m. How many minutes? 5 minutes. So that translates into 10:05 p.m. You don't have to put the 0, because it's not a decimal point. The dot is just separating how many minutes past the hour on the right hand side versus what hour are we in. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're dealing with time. So for example, in this one, we're saying we want silent mode to be on. I'm going to say if the time is greater than, let's see, is greater than let's do 24. So if it's greater than, oh no, not 24, 23, 11 p.m., 23. So if time is greater than 23, means after, if it's later than 11 p.m., then turn silent mode on. And then you could do another one that says, going to go silent mode again, silent mode, turn on if, and we're going to use that same variable, which you can type it or you can hit the little label button and pick it out. And we're going to say if time is less than, and let's say 8. So less than 8 means what? Anywhere before 8 a.m. So midnight to 8 a.m. We're going to put silent mode on. And then we're going to do another one. We're going to say silent mode off. And then we're going to say if time is, let's do time again. If time is greater than 8 a.m. and time is less than, we'll say 10:30. Ouch. 10:30 is 22:30 because we're in military time. So there you go. Basically, you can have this one button that anytime you tap it, or I have something similar to this for that's connected to an NFC tag. So when I tap the NFC tag by my bed at night, if the current time is greater than 23, which is really only gives you 1 hour, because 23 to 24 and then it resets, then silent mode is on. Or if I tap that button, maybe I'm going to bed late tonight and it's 1 a.m. Well, if I tap that button or tap that NFC tag and it's less than 8, which means midnight up to 8 a.m., then silent mode goes on. However, if I tap that same button, if the time is greater than 8, greater than 8 a.m., but it's before 22:30, in other words, before 10:30 a.m., then that same button should turn silent mode off, which of course if it's already off is going to be a moot point, but if it happens to be on, then it turns it on and it turns it off. So that's one context. And within this task we only have something happening, ignore the beep, besides beep, we only have something, let's just delete that, happening based on these if context. So if none of these are true, which right now we only have a 30-minute window where one of them wouldn't be true, then nothing happens. So I just wanted to show you how you can use time to make things happen in between. And this isn't necessarily the best way to do this. I would probably have started off this whole task with an if-else statement and done if and then time, and then here's what you do, else, else if, which I've covered in other lessons. This is just a quick way to just give you an example of how you can use time. And in doing that, you can, you could, besides using time, you could use the text time. So this would be based on if the text time. And we did that in a recent lesson where I showed you how to have, we were announcing the text, but not if the time that had passed since the last text was really low. And we use this. So you can use text time as a context in the same way. Let's get rid of the original time. So that's SMSRT, that's your text received time. So if you received a text and the time you received it was before 8 a.m. So you can use that. You can also use the email time or the call time. So you can use that inside of variables to create additional context for how or when something should happen inside of your task activity list. So this in and of itself isn't necessarily a task for you to set up and use. I just wanted to show you how you use time so that you could then use that for different things you might want to set up. Okay, so what I want to show you is this other thing that you can do, which is where you can convert. If you go into variables and you go into variable convert, this doesn't just do time, it does a lot of things, but I specifically want to show you time. Specifically date time to seconds. Date time to seconds and how you can use that. Now, in order to convert a date time to seconds, first of all you have to have the full date and the full time, and there has to be a space in between them. So why might you want to do that? Well, let me show you what you might want to use to do that, and then we can go from there. So taking a variable or picking the variable activity, and then you would go variable set, and then you make up your own variable. For the sake of this, we'll say 101 time. So 101 time. Now what are we going to set that to? We're going to set that to text date, so the date that we received a text, and then we're going to add text time. So we're taking our user variable and we're setting it to the date that we received a text and the time that we received a text. Because maybe it was if it was a text you received, yesterday, I mean, within the last 24 hours, the time would be enough. But if it's a text you received yesterday, 2 days ago, 3 days ago, or maybe prior to midnight, and so it's going to throw off using time to do the maths just by itself, you want to use time in seconds so that it also includes the date. So we're going to set it to the date and the time. And then once you've done that, now you can go over to variables and go over to variable convert. You can take the variable that we just created, 101 time, which we know is storing the text date and time, and you can convert it from a date time to seconds. And then you can store the results in again, a user variable that you create. So let's go %101 time SEC. So we know it's time in seconds. So basically you've taken the date and time that you received a text, assigned it to the 101 time variable, and then you've converted it into seconds. So now you could subtract that, for example, from the current time in seconds and use that difference to figure out something. It's a little bit complex. Hopefully you understand how that works. It may not be something that you'd ever use, but if you only use the time of a text or the time of an email or the time of a phone call, then if it's greater than a 24-hour difference, it's going to possibly throw you off. So this would be something that would allow you to work with that if you want to. So anyway, that's time. That's it for this lesson. It's about time. I just wanted to cover all the different ways you can use time, both in variables inside of tasks and activities, to use if statements, and then as well how you also can use it in your profiles as an event with a single time, or as a more of a context when you have a different from and to time, or how you can have something trigger repeatedly every so many minutes or so many hours. If you click the repeat button, then it will repeat it between those times. So hopefully that'll help some of you out if you're trying to create profiles and somehow involve time. If you have any questions, comments, please feel free to put them below. I always do my best to answer when I can. And that is it for this task or tutorial. If you just stumbled upon this and don't know about all the other tutorials, check out the playlist. Got lots of tutorials that teach you how to get the best out of Tasker. Also have tons of Android app reviews on my channel, about 200 Android app reviews, as well as a bunch of product reviews that you might be interested in as well. So check those out. Anyway, that is it until next time. So have fun with Tasker.